It's no secret that kaiju movies are a relatively niche genre in the film landscape as a whole. Occasionally you have your Pacific Rims and -1s, which bring the genre back to the public eye for a time, but it usually doesn't last. Hell, the largest output for big monster movies right now is Legendary's Monsterverse, and to be honest, it hardly feels like a verse when there's only 2 monsters people can actually name from it. Regardless, the fact remains it's not the most mainstream genre out there. So why is that? Well, there's plenty of plausible explanations. Lack of interest from Western audiences, less emphasis on star power and big name actors, Toho being a pain in the ass when it comes to letting people actually watch their stuff. I mean, I could go on. However, from personal experience, I think a big contributor would be the negative stigma that is commonly associated with these movies. There's definitely this common misconception that kaiju movies, especially the older ones, are incredibly tacky, boring and lame, despite the amount of absolute cinema there is to be found. I've dedicated a lot of my time on this channel trying to allay that stigma, but believe it or not, there are some cases where those misconceptions are somewhat realised. I would know, I've talked about them. But what I haven't talked about is kaiju media that sucks because the monster itself is absolute garbage. Pretty much the worst case scenario for these films. It's like going to your local chippy only to find the chips are trash. Yeah man, I'm not too keen to try your battered sausage and haddock when the main reason I'm there in the first place is less than satisfactory. Although I'm not sure how many of you can relate to that example given most people that watch this channel are from the States, so I mean, I know it's like going to your local Wendy's and finding out their burgers are trash. I don't know. Bad jokes aside, in this video I'll be covering a variety of lame kaiju you've probably never heard of. And if you have, well, hopefully you learned something new about them. Without further ado, let's dive right in. For starters, let's explore Gamera's first and seriously underutilized opponent, Barugon, who made his debut in the second Gamera film, Gamera vs Barugon. Now at first glance, what comes to your mind when looking at this guy? Because to me, he just looks like an absolute goofy goober. It's hard to take him seriously in the slightest when he has that cheeky grin on his face throughout the whole film. And this was before Gamera got overly campy and cheesy. Make no mistake, this is a serious film for all intents and purposes. However, that being said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the suit, while kind of funny looking, isn't terrible by any means. Ryosaku Takayama was the mind behind this suit, the same guy who worked on a lot of the monster suits from Ultraman. Clearly the dude does good work, and Barugon for the most part is no exception. But the issue here is that compared to his opponent, it does look pretty jarring. The Gamera suit in this film is simply put, bloody phenomenal. It looks so damn good that while the Barugon suit isn't bad per se, it just pales in comparison to Gamera who just mops the floor with him. Still, that doesn't necessarily make him super lame, right? Well, no, it doesn't. At first, it seems like he's just an average middle-of-the-road kaiju who makes a decent foe to Gamera, especially with his power of ice and his ability to shoot out his tongue like a chameleon, which is a neat little effect. An ability that would return a couple decades later with Zadus and Gamera the Brave. Only I'd argue it's way cooler in that film, but I digress. So what makes Barugon lame enough to put on this list, you ask? Well, it all comes down to his special power and weakness. Oh no, you thought his ice breath and tongue were what made him special? Nope. He has an ace up his sleeve. You see, when those two powers fail, Barugon has the ultimate ability to shoot an arching rainbow out of his back. A rainbow that magically explodes things and can easily be countered by a big mirror. Hell yeah. Honestly, I do kind of love how oddly specific and stupid it is. It's also how we recognise that Barugon has been defeated. At the end of the film he shoots one final rainbow, but unfortunately he doesn't reach his destination and soon fades away, signifying our goofy boy's tragic demise, which brings me to his weakness. It was never going to be easy taking down the absolute unit that is Barugon, but thankfully we, alongside Gamera, managed to find a way, and that way is just spraying some water on him. No, really, there's one point in the movie where they manage to paralyse Barugon by pouring artificial rain on him. At the end of the film he is defeated by Gamera, who drags him into a lake until he dies. His weakness is water, that's it. Now before I get any angry comments, yes, technically he is only weak to fresh water, hence why he didn't immediately die after hatching in the ocean. But still, I mean, come on. Maybe on Mars he'd be somewhat effective, but otherwise Barugon is just the king of all jobbers. Hell, I'm pretty sure he's the only kaiju who didn't make Gamera bleed. What is it with famous kaiju first opponents being the biggest pushovers in monster history? Even with all that being said though, I'd still watch Gamera vs Barugon in a heartbeat over Godzilla raids again. The movie itself isn't the worst Gamera movie out there, not by a long shot. There's some really great match shots here and there, and the miniatures are a huge step up from the first film. And the monster action is pretty decent overall. The problem is just how little of it there actually is. The film runs for almost 2 hours and man did it come to a halt constantly throughout its running time. Even if you're a Barugon appreciator, have fun fun actually watching the film because man, there's barely friggin' in it. As for Barugon's origin, it's your standard mythical creature from a native island type deal. Nothing too crazy to write home about. At the end of the day, Barugon is lame in the same way Doug from the Monsterverse is lame. They're both mid, but ultimately inoffensive kaiju that are so goofy and cute looking that you can't help but love them for it. Plus, Barugon has become somewhat of an LGBTQ icon in recent years. Obviously because of the silly rainbow power, of course. Still, it's nice seeing his goofy ass get drawn every Pride Month, so you know, hey, there's that. Moving on, let's talk about Big Ass Spider from the 2013 action comedy film Big Ass Spider. Yeah, I don't know how to feel about the title of this film. It's simultaneously descriptive, yet not descript in the slightest, if that makes any sense. On one hand, the movie title doesn't really tell you much because if you think about it, every spider is a big, thick badonkadonk. It kind of comes with the territory. But at the same time, I mean, the spider in this film is indeed one big ass spider. I'm pretty sure they say as much verbatim in the movie itself. Plus, you gotta respect director Mike Mendez's insistence on having that title in the first place. You see, the production company Epic Pictures originally requested for the movie to be renamed Mega Spider, fearing that big ass spider wouldn't be very marketable internationally. Man, they couldn't have been more wrong about that. And luckily, Mike realizes before possibly capitulating to their demands. Big Ass Spider is the kind of movie you will stumble on by complete accident and end up watching out of sheer curiosity, for better or worse. I know that for a fact because that's how I discovered the film. Back when I was a kid, I remember scrolling through Netflix at my neighbour's house, stopping when we happened upon this movie. In a similar vein to movies like Cocaine Bear, Snakes on a Plane and Bad CGI Gator, the title is the only thing selling the movie because it's just so absurd. The only problem with this kind of marketing is that usually the film itself is mid at best. The 3 examples I mentioned prove as much, but does this also apply to Big Ass Spider? Well, to be honest, I don't know. I watched it ages ago as a kid, but I barely remember it at all. What I do remember is the aforementioned Big Ass Spider. And what I remember about the Big Ass Spider is that it was one lame ass spider. As for how it came to be in the first place, a bunch of scientists happened upon some alien DNA. You know, as you do. And they realised that it can be used as a sort of growth hormone. They test it out on some fruit only to realise there was a spider hidden inside, and so the spider also gets affected by the DNA, transforming said spider into the Big Ass Spider over the course of the film. It's up to our 2 protagonists, Alex and Ramos, to stop this 8-legged menace. From there, the film is pretty rote and predictable. It starts with some BS premise, the monster gets more powerful throughout the film, we eventually learn the truth behind its origin, the protagonists figure out the oddly specific way to kill it, they kill it, and Alex gets the girl in the end. Now, to be fair, being tropey and predictable isn't always a bad thing. In fact, a large consensus among reviewers is that the film is schlocky and campy in the best way possible. But I digress. Going back to the Big Ass Spider, I feel like it's a big product of its time. The early 2010s gave rise to the absolute dominance of CGI and oversaturated colouring in almost every movie, popularised by the money-making tyrant that was the Bayformers movie. This film is no different, with heavy colouring aplenty. Heck, even the spider looks like a transformer in some shots, which is an odd coincidence, but it brings me to the biggest issue I have with its design. Most people consider spiders to be creepy. I'm one of them. But this thing? I'm sorry, it just ain't creepy or even intimidating. I think that's in large part due to the emphasis on its rear end over the 8 legs. You know, the defining feature that makes spiders so unnerving. Maybe that's the point because this is a comedy after all. Plus, it's not like they had a massive dodeca budget to spare on the film. Still, there's just countless examples of big spiders done right. The spider in Kong's Skull Island, for instance. Very brief, but made pretty unnerving by the fact that it comes completely out of nowhere. I'd happily take Humunga any day. Now there's a big ass spider I can get behind. Regardless, that's Big Ass Spider. It's a spider that is big and has an ass. Next, the 1950s begot the rise of the kaiju film, bringing the genre to new and unseen heights. Sure, there were famous kaiju films before this period, but with films like Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and of course Godzilla, it's hard to argue that this wasn't the start of the kaiju boom in cinema history. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is because of course not every big monster flick is going to be a slam dunk. In fact, there are some attempts so bad it's almost hilarious. Enter 1957 film The Giant Claw, a movie that is quite infamous in cinema circles for having one of the ugliest movie monsters to date. And not the good kind of ugly you'd expect from a kaiju flick. I'm talking so ugly it's downright laughable. I briefly showed a glimpse of it in the intro, but now, lo and behold, ladies and gentlemen, I give you The Giant Claw. Golden buzzer. Need I say more? But let's be real here. What were they thinking? It looks like a mutant turkey transformed by the atom bomb. While I can't tell you what exactly they were thinking, I can tell you the reasoning and events that led up to this abomination's short-lived grace upon the silver screen. So originally, producer Sam Feltzman wanted to hire Ray Harryhausen to design and create a monster utilising stop motion. Unfortunately, just like a big-ass spider, they were held back by budgetary constraints. Naturally, sacrifices had to be made. Instead of stop motion, they opted to hire a random special effects studio in Mexico to create a marionette puppet for the film. The result was less than ideal, to say the least. Somehow I managed to sit through the whole movie, and let me tell you, it ain't great. It's a pretty generic kaiju movie aside from the butt ugly bird. Basically it follows the story of one Mitch McAfee. Before going on to create an antivirus software company, he worked as a flight engineer, testing out planes for the US military. During one of his test runs, he witnesses a UFO, but of course no one believes him as it wasn't picked up on the radar. Eventually, they realise the UFO is real and it's a flying turkey. The turkey wreaks havoc all over the place, they find an oddly specific way to stop it, the day is saved, he gets the girl. You all know the story. Honestly, the most enjoyable aspect of the movie is watching all of the cast attempt to take this goofy ass bird seriously. The cherry on top of this crap sundae is the fact that the giant claw might actually be one of the most powerful kaiju of all time. The movie states that the giant claw is constantly surrounded by a field of antimatter, hence why the military's weapons have no effect on the creature. I'm no science whiz, but like, doesn't that make this bird nigh indestructible? I mean, if Kong, Godzilla or Gamera tried to take a swipe at it, their limbs would just explode or at the very least be destroyed, right? Because I mean, that's matter coming into contact with antimatter. Plus, they wouldn't be able to use their powers like Godzilla's atomic breath or Gamera's fire, because it would have no effect, at least going by the movie's logic anyway. I'm sure both mine and the movie's knowledge of science isn't exactly up to snuff, but you know what? I'm a believer. I believe in giant claw supremacy, okay? You can easily solo every kaiju in existence. But you know who could take on the giant claw though? Well, it's none other than our boy Gappa! Woo! Where my Gappa fans at? Hells yeah, anyone? No? Okay. Oftentimes when a foreign film would be brought over here, they would opt to rename it something more appropriate for Western audiences. In most cases this would backfire completely, with most movies being given titles that weren't at all indicative of the film's tone nor its substance. Like say for example Tango being renamed Attack of the Mushroom People and Godzilla Raids Again being renamed Gigantus the Fire Monster. Crappy American renaming also affected our boy Gappa. When he made his debut in the West, no longer was the movie called Gappa, the Triamphibian monster, instead replaced by monster from a prehistoric planet. I mean, that's not even true. Gappa isn't from some mysterious prehistoric planet from outer space, he's from some random island like 90% of kaiju are. But with that aside, you might be wondering why I even went on this whole tangent in the first place. Well, there's a good reason for it. At the end of the day, there really is just nothing of note to say about Gappa. He's just lame. I mean, just look at him. His design is atrocious, a B-Tech Rodan if I ever saw one, and that's being generous. It looks like they just glued a beak and wings onto an old unused Godzilla suit. The result being a jumbled mismatch that doesn't go together at all. The whole selling point behind this guy is that he's the Triamphibian monster. Humanity beware! These terrifying terrors have conquered the air, the land and the sea. Unfortunately, being powerful does not a badass kaiju make. What's the point in dominating every modem of transport and warfare when you look so dorky while doing it? On top of that, they have one of the worst kaiju roars I've ever heard. It sounds like Tom from Tom and Jerry getting his ass smacked by a comically large 2x4. I haven't even talked about Gappa yet. Oh yeah, all this time I've been showing footage of his parents, who are bad enough on their own. But then you get to Gappa himself and oh my god. What is that? Maybe it's just me, but something about his appearance makes me deeply uncomfortable. He's not cute like Baby Godzilla or strong and capable like Suko. He's just, ugh. Get him away from me. Like many kaiju before him, Gappa comes from an unexplored native island. Our protagonists stumble upon a giant egg which hatches, revealing our boy Gappa. They take Gappa back to Japan so they can study him and show him off at the zoo. This of course angers Mummy and Daddy, who attack Japan with a vengeance until humanity wisens up and gives them back their baby. The plot is pretty much a one-to-one retelling of British kaiju film Gorgo, only somehow worse than that film, which in of itself isn't all that great either. But yeah, there you have it, that's Gappa. Let's move on to the next lame-o. In order to cover this next kaiju, we must first delve into the wasted potential and mediocrity that is the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy. One of the most disappointing film viewings I've ever had to endure. Mothra is probably my favourite kaiju, like, period. Or at the very least top 3. As for why Mothra is so dope, I mean, she's just so different from any other kaiju. I love her softer design, gentle nature and unique lore. Plus, you can't go wrong with that beautifully iconic theme song. You can imagine my giddiness when I found out she got her own trilogy during the Heisei era. Mothra starring in her own films? Holy shit, this is going to be awesome! But alas, it wasn't awesome. The Rebirth trilogy is plagued by questionable changes to Mothra's lore, subpar CGI, overly kiddie atmosphere, and of course, lame kaiju. And of course, lame monsters. The kaiju we're going to be talking about is Dagara, who made their debut in Rebirth of Mothra 2. For context, Dagara was created by an ancient civilization called the Nilai for the purpose of cleaning up their marine pollution. However, this backfired hard, as Dagara started producing these poisonous starfish which destroyed not only pollution but everything else in its wake. After years of fighting the beast, both it and the Nilai vanished for centuries. Cut to Rebirth of Mothra 2, where Dagara finally returned. It's up to Mothra, Leo and friends to uncover the secrets of the Nilai and put an end to Dagara once and for all. Yeah, it's your average kaiju movie story. It wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't literally just the first film again beat for beat. What makes matters even more embarrassing is how Dagara gets defeated, but we'll get to that shortly. For now, let's talk about his design. The actual suit itself is pretty well made. By the time the Heisei era rolled around, Toho had pretty much perfected their suit making repertoire. Even the lamest suits looked pretty good, and this is no exception. What I take issue with is the actual design. It's just so bland and generic looking. Dagara could be any old dragon from any piece of fantasy media. There's just nothing really striking about this guy, especially when compared to your Mothras and King Ghidorahs. His abilities aren't anything to write home about either. He has a generic beam like every other Heisei kaiju, but the most noteworthy power is without a doubt his poisonous pet, starfish. So poisonous that it actually affects Mothra Leo and causes him to camp on top of the ancient Nilai temple for half the movie, while Dagara continuously tries and fails to attack him. Clearly he never learned the definition of insanity. You'd think being bland and forgettable would be bad enough, but oh no. It's time we talked about how this guy actually gets defeated. One would think that Mothra Leo is the hero of this movie, but that is not the case. Dagara's true nemesis is this guy. Meet Gogo, a weird woolly miniature creature which I can only describe as a slightly less disturbing Furby lookalike. An ancient being with the power to heal people by pissing on them. No, I am not messing with you. That's literally what he does. There's literally a scene where one of the antagonists gets injured by rubble and we get a POV shot from his perspective as Gogo pisses all over him, healing his injuries. A piss POV, if you will. I mean, to be fair, how often do you get that in movies? Huh? Not very often. At the end of the movie, Gogo fuses with Mothra Leo, turning him into Rainbow Mothra, and with his newfound powers, enters Dagara's body and destroys him from the inside. Fun fact, this scene was the idea of special effects director Koichi Kawakita, who was also in charge of the effects on the mainline Godzilla Heisei films. It was an idea he had for years but never got to implement successfully until this film. On one hand, it's cool to see this guy's vision finally realised. At the same time though, I mean, the CG in this sequence isn't all that great, I mean, let's be honest. It's iffy looking at best. Anyways, going back to Dagara, let's recap everything we've learned about him. He's a lame and generic looking kaiju with lame powers that grind the movie to a stop and ultimately gets thwarted by a Furby with piss powers. I mean, that's one hell of a legacy, I'll say that much. While the 2010s saw the debut of Big Ass Spider, it was also the era of cheesy pop culture filled family comedies. Aliens in the Attic, Paul Blart, and Furry Vengeance to name a few. Whether you liked any of these films is based entirely on whether you grew up in that time or not. If you're subbed to this channel, then you already know that there is an audience for these kind of movies, for better or for worse. There are plenty more movies I could name off as examples, but one that time has forgot, and for good reason might I add, is none other than the adaptation of Gulliver's Travels that dropped in 2010, starring Jack Black. Like Big Ass Spider, this is one I remember watching as a kid, although even as a kid I remember not being impressed whatsoever. It was trying way too hard to be funny and culturally relevant, to the point where it feels super dated, and the only part that really comes to mind is the scene where Jack Black pisses on a building. I've already talked about piss way too much for one video. You can tell it's going to be slot based solely on the tagline, which might be the worst one I've ever seen for a movie. Black is the new big. What? What does that even mean? I mean, okay, yeah, it's clearly a play on Orange is the New Black, but the difference is that show's title made sense. It was about a women's prison where they all wear orange jumpsuits. Black is always a fashionable colour, and given that everyone always wears orange jumpsuits, ergo, orange is the new black. Here, the tagline doesn't make any sense in any context other than just describing an element of the movie, and in that case it might just be the most appropriate tagline in film history. The tone of the movie, like the tagline, is stupid. The theme is that Jack Black is big now, and that's about it. Anyways, if you don't know the story of Gulliver's Travels, it's basically about some bloke called Gulliver who travels to an island of little people, initially being treated as a monster by the islanders, but eventually earning their respect and trust. That's the long and short of it, and for the most part it's the same with the 2010 adaptation. Only this time around it takes place in the modern day, and Gulliver is now a dorky nerd living in New York who talks to his action figure, because it wouldn't be a Jack Black film if he didn't do that for some reason. Jack Black getting a kaiju sized makeover would be lame enough on its own, but that's not even what I had in mind for this video. As I said earlier, Gulliver eventually gets accepted by the islanders. Well, all except for one person, General Edwards, the commander of the island's military forces, who eventually confronts Gulliver mano a mano using this monstrosity. I don't know if it has a name, I don't think it does, so we're just gonna call it General Edwards' robot. And yet this is just a disaster. Like, come on, it looks like Mr. Electric on steroids for crying out loud. I feel bad for insulting Big Ass Spider because at least he looks somewhat decent. It's a generic Rock'em Sock'em looking robot whose existence doesn't even make sense within the context of the movie. At no point in the film have the Islanders shown this level of technological prowess, yet somehow the General manages to have built a giant mech suit seemingly out of nowhere. It exists purely so there can be conflict in the film and so the kids get to enjoy a big dumb set piece. Not even a good set piece either, as watching this thing awkwardly lumber around doesn't exactly make for the best action. The fight scene between Gulliver and the robot is pretty much the at-home version of Hulkbuster Iron Man vs the Hulk. Point is, it's lame as hell. I wish I could tell you it only gets better, but with the next movie monster I'm going to talk about, it most certainly does not. This wouldn't be much of a lame kaiju list without mentioning Yonggary. A name that either elicits no reaction whatsoever or strikes fear into the very fibre of your being, for all the wrong reasons. Why? Well, in order to get an answer to that, we must first go over some brief kaiju history. As I was talking about earlier with Gappa, the release of Godzilla saw a huge boom in kaiju productions. Every major film company in Japan, be it Toho, Dai, Nikatsu, etc., were all competing to create the next big kaiju. However, it wasn't only Japan that had a vested interest in giant monsters. Plenty of countries around the world also wanted a piece of the kaiju pie, one of those countries being South Korea, who in 1967, the same year as Gappa, released a big monster movie of their own, Yonggary Monster from the Deep. Out of all the Godzilla knockoffs out there, this one is definitely the most derivative in terms of design. Take the horn away from this guy and he literally looks like a cheap bootleg you'd buy from a shady seller on eBay. Aside from that, there's nothing really noteworthy about this film. It's hard to gauge whether Koreans took the film or not, but regardless of what they thought, it clearly made a huge cultural impact in the country. They even made spoof films based on the kaiju, like Yonggary and Princess Zuzu, which from what little I have seen looks absolutely amazing. After a couple decades absence from the silver screen, the South Korean kaiju eventually made a comeback in the 1999 soft reboot, Yonggary. I guess this time around he's not from the deep. Funnily enough, this movie was directed by the same guy who did that spoof film, Pyung-rae Shim. Unfortunately, this would turn out to be one bad omen, because like that spoof, this film also turned out to be a joke. You see, Yonggary is famous, or rather infamous, for not only being the worst kaiju movie ever made, but one of the worst movies ever made. Period. Hoi, where do I even start? It's got an uninteresting plot, boring characters, flat cinematography, and some of the worst CGI out there. Perfectly highlighted by our boy Yonggary, who's ugly enough to make the dragons from Mortal Kombat Annihilation blush. I mean, his overall design isn't terrible. I even go as far as to say it's an improvement over the 1967 version, which is just Godzilla but with a horn. However, the execution, as you can see, is bloody awful. How are we supposed to take this guy seriously when every close-up of his face makes us laugh, cringe, or both? Hell, it only gets worse when you see Yonggary in motion. The aim by using CGI was to create a more realistic looking series of movements, are as realistic as you can get with a giant monster. The result looks like a clumsy mess with Yonggary officially dodging incoming missiles like Neo on meth. What makes a good kaiju scene isn't just having a giant monster fight some jets and tanks, it's seeing the impact it has on the environment around them. In all the Heisei Godzilla movies, you see civilians fleeing from the city in a beautiful looking matte shots. We see the monsters being literal forces of nature as they destroy everything around them. In Yonggary, they literally cut to stock footage of a busy highway in the midst of an ongoing fight between the monster and the military. Hello? Shouldn't you guys be bolting as far away from the giant force of nature as fast as possible? While there is collateral damage, most of it is done by the military who seemingly miss almost every single shot, destroying their own city in the process. I mean, I'll admit, this is a first for the genre. I don't think I've ever seen the armed forces in a kaiju movie do more damage to the city than the giant monster in front of them. On top of that, the environmental destruction ranges from okay to absolute garbage. In some shots they detonated actual miniatures, which admittedly look pretty decent. However, in other shots they rely entirely on CG, which oftentimes looks like a generic green screen explosion effect you can find on YouTube, being chroma keyed over a bland building. To be honest, bland pretty much sums up every moment of destruction in this movie. The battle between Yonggary and the military might as well be taking place in the big city map on Gmod, because it's just so lifeless. The only memorable part is witnessing just how jarring and out of place Yonggary looks in the film compared to its surroundings. And also a part where one of the characters says,
"Compared to this guy, Godzilla is a pussy."
And to think this is the upgraded version of the film. Yeah, what you're seeing is the 2001 release of the movie, dubbed Reptilian internationally, which apparently improved the special effects. As far as I know, the only footage that exists of the original first release is from some behind the scenes reels you can find on YouTube. In a way, we were kinda spared from Yonggary's true wrath, so maybe we should be thankful. Nah, who am I kidding, this is still insanely lame. Finally, we've reached the last kaiju I'm going to be talking about, and boy are they a doozy. Okay, you've heard of space. You've heard of Godzilla. Heck, you may even have heard of Space Godzilla. But have you heard of a Space Godzilla? As you can imagine, there have been a plethora of cancelled, shelved and rejected Godzilla projects over the years. The majority of these never seeing the light of day, aside from word of mouth here and there. However, sometimes ideas can slip through the cracks and we get a better glimpse on what could have been. Enter a Space Godzilla, a story that was published in Japanese magazine Starlog in 1979 based on an idea for a new Godzilla film that was proposed to Toho but never made it to production. If you haven't heard of this story before, then you're in for a treat because it has a rather notorious reputation for being the most bizarre piece of official Godzilla media ever released. The story opens on a little girl discovering Godzilla's corpse washed up on the beach. Oh, and just in case you had any doubts they were dead, they made sure to include an insanely detailed drawing of Godzilla's lifeless body with all their guts sprawled out all over the shore. Jesus, that's gore. That's gore of my comfort character. Keep in mind, this was made during the Showa era. Godzilla was still considered a franchise for young kids at this point, with the latest film being Terror of Mechagodzilla, a film where Godzilla is depicted as a sort of mythological guardian angel of justice, answering the call whenever a kid cries out for help. I'm gonna go from that to seeing Godzilla's insides on full display. So what caused their tragic demise? Was it an explosion, or maybe an enemy kaiju? Nah. It was diabetes. Type 1, type 2, who knows, but the humans know for a fact that it was the diabetes what killed them. Officially co-signed by Toho, by the way. The humans also discover through psychic communication that Godzilla wasn't a dinosaur fossil mutated by nuclear testing, but actually an alien named Roseanne, who hails from an entire planet of pacifist Godzillas. Why this one went on multiple rampages on Earth is never explained. Maybe it was their diabetes, or maybe it was the fact that Roseanne is pregnant with a child who will later be named Ririn. The humans decide to transform Roseanne's body into a rocket ship, sending both the corpse and the child back home, which I think is supposed to be comforting in a way, but is just 1,000 times more disturbing than anything. Long story short, Roseanne comes back to life and starts regenerating. I can't even begin to know how that works, eventually returning home with Ririn and then reuniting with her husband Kunin. Unfortunately, they arrived at a bad time, as the Godzilla planet is currently being invaded and its denizens oppressed by an alien race known as the Sonarians. With all that absurd nonsense out of the way, we can finally get to the reason why I'm even talking about this weird footnote in Godzilla history to begin with. As you've probably surmised, the lame kaiju I'm talking about is one of the Sonarians. More specifically, the commander of the Sonarian army, General Gamera. When I first saw her design, my blooming jaw dropped at the fetishistic monstrosity displayed before me, as well as the sheer audacity of Toho to even approve of it in the first place. Guys, whatever you're picturing in your head, I promise you it's much worse. Okay, I've delayed long enough. It's time to feast your eyes on the one and only Gamera. Sorry, I just thought I should let that image sink in for a moment. To be honest, I'm at a loss for words. Like, I guess first of all, like, why on earth did they give her kaiju-sized milkers? Why? There's clearly some barely disguised fetish stuff going on. The drawing alone makes that pretty clear, but man, it just gets 10 times worse when you actually read the story. When Gamera is first introduced, we get an uncomfortably intricate description of her appearance and abilities, and I think I'm going to regret this, but I'm just going to read it to you. General Gamera had a more threatening body than the Godzillas. When Gamera became angry, flames would come shooting out of her enormous breasts, and throwing knives in the shape of swastikas would come flying out of her belly button. From her mouth, she would vomit out nests of spiders. The most terrifying things of all were her talons on her feet, and a long black whip that she held in her hand. Yep, a kaiju who shoots swastikas. I definitely needed this in my life. There's actually a surprising amount of names attached to this horrific creation, the most notable being Nobuhiko Obayashi, who's credited as the creator of the story. This is the same guy who directed one of the most... I can't get over the enormous breasts, I'm sorry. This is the same guy who directed one of the most famous horror movies of all time, 1977's House. It's actually a really amazing yet insanely trippy and bizarre film. I guess we know why this story is so damn weird. At the time a Space Godzilla released, he was still working for Toho, so just in case you thought this was a pitch by some random dude, no. This idea was proposed by a critically acclaimed director who had proven his capability in the world of film. That's what makes the story even weirder to me. Sure, it never made it to the motion pictures, but it could have. How Toho were willing to have the idea published in a magazine, so clearly they weren't vehemently against it. I should mention that what I'm reading is a fan translation of the magazine, as it was never released internationally. I'm sure you can see why. I'll leave a link to it in the description because it's definitely a bizarre read, and I'm omitting a lot of details here. Going back to Gamera, we also get a window into her personality and what she's like. Both Gamera and the entire Cenarian race are pretty much the Dark Eldar of the Godzilla universe. A pure evil race of beings who love conquering, killing and torturing their victims. There's even a moment where Gamera tortures Godzilla's newly born baby, striking him with a whip when he doesn't give her the information she wants. I'm feeling disbelief that this is a thing in an official piece of Godzilla media. Story ends with Gamera and Kunin doing battle, with Gamera getting her head ripped off and the two species making peace. I never thought I'd say this, but man, I really want to watch All Monsters Attack. Like, I just need a wholesome palate cleanser after suffering through this incredibly uncomfortable read. I did not know anything about Gamera other than her appearance until this video, and I kinda debated her inclusion because she's more gross and weird than lame. Ultimately, I thought there was just too much sauce that it would have been a shame not to talk about her. Anyways, that's all of the kaiju I wanted to cover today. My god, this video turned out way longer than I expected. Every time I would look into one of these kaiju, the rabbit hole would just go deeper and deeper. If this video does well, maybe I'll even make a volume 2 covering some even more lame kaiju, because to be honest, I've barely even scratched the surface here. Like, I didn't talk about the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla monsters, I didn't talk about the obscure Ultramen one-off kaiju, I didn't talk about the monsters from the Kong game. Like, there's like so much I didn't cover. There's a lot of lameness to go around in the kaiju genre, and hopefully I've given you a good taste of it. With that being said, that's all I have to say for this video. Like if you liked, dislike if you disliked, subscribe for more quality content, and I'll see you guys next time.
Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. It doesn't matter if it's boiled or fried. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. It doesn't matter if it's boiled or fried.